Coming up this week on Breaking Badness, we are going to discuss Locate X marks the spot. Privacy advocates gained access to a powerful tool bought by U.S. law enforcement agencies that can track smartphone locations around the world, which includes places of health, places of worship, and individual people can be monitored all without a warrant. So we'll be talking about that, along with when a blizzard becomes flurries, Amazon identified internet domains abused by APT29. And of course, our fun game, Gold Guidance and Grievances. With that, Breaking Badness is next. Welcome to Breaking Badness episode number 194. Oh my gosh, we're slowly inching to 200, but we are recording on October 28th, 2024. I am Kali, CertFin USA Fencl. With me co-host Tim, this maid ain't so merry, Helming, and last but not least, Taylor RDP Freely Wilkes-Pierce. So we're going to talk about this tool called Locate X. It's a very powerful tool that was bought by U.S. law enforcement agencies, and it can track smartphone locations around the world without a warrant, which is not great. So maybe, Tim, to start us out, what can you tell us about Locate X and how it functions in tracking smartphones?
Yeah, to set the scene. So as probably most of our listeners / viewers now know, cell phone location data has been available for a long time, and it's been for sale for a long time. So what's new here with Locate X is this really easy to use front end that Babel Street, who made it, put onto the data in this product. And also new here is the fact that, or at least newly known, is how widely this is used by law enforcement. But the tracking, to talk about the technology a little bit more, the tracking is done in a couple different fundamental ways. One way is by cell towers. So the relative signal strength of the phone to the cell tower, the phone will register to any cell tower that it can communicate with, and your phone is constantly looking for cell towers. By the way, that is why, if you've ever known, if you're way out in the middle of nowhere, your battery dies quicker. That's because your phone turns up its transmit power trying to communicate with the tower, and it has to use more transmitter power to do that if the tower is farther away. And so when you're a long distance from any tower, your battery will drain more quickly. But the fact that the phone is constantly registering to cell towers means that they have that data, they have relative signal strength, and you can calculate where the phone is from that. But then the other sort of easy way is that your phone has a GPS on board. GPSs are very accurate these days, down to a couple feet. And that data is extractable as well. And it's for sale right now. If you're listening to this podcast on a smartphone, your smartphone, unless you've taken specific configuration measures, your smartphone is happily sending that data to data brokers who are creating shareholder value off of your location data. And other things are happening with it too. And all of this goes through a series of transactions, basically, with the data. And in our case that we're talking about today, some of that data ends up in the hands of Babel Street's product, Locate X, and the customers thereof.
Do we know, was the intention behind Locate X always for this, or do we not know for sure?
Yeah, so since this product is not advertised widely as a service that's available to everyone, that means they can't hide behind the old, well, it's just so that we can optimize the customer experience, that BS that we're always hearing about. That does not seem to apply in this case. It looks like this tool is marketed specifically, or I don't know if it's even, if you could say it's marketed, but I think it is at some level, for government entities or those who have contracts or other legal relationships with said government entities, or who say that they do, with apparently not a lot of scrutiny, which is what made this article that we're referring to here possible.
Yes, and the article is from 404 Media that we're...
Love them. They are so great.
Shout out to 404 Media.
Yes.
Always producing really interesting research and news coverage. So that's something, if you're not currently a subscriber of theirs, I highly recommend. Yeah.
Pause the podcast, go subscribe.
Oh, yes. They also have a podcast too. Listen to this one first. And then there. So Tim, what are some interesting features of Locate X?
So it basically, I mentioned earlier, it's this really easy to use mapping front end that will show the current or recent location of devices. And I think it starts out, it's basically a filtering process. So it starts out with, here are all the devices. Okay, great. If I'm interested in tracking people who frequent a given location, or I'm interested in starting with a house and now I want to know what are the comings and goings relative to that house, or any location you can think of as the starting point, you can then filter it down and say, okay, I only want to see the devices that are at this place, and then I want to see where they go and so forth. So location history of devices, it'll do a feature where it will show you the most frequent locations for a given device. You can select a device and then have it basically play back their movements in an animated sequence. So you can see literally where they're going on the map. And as I mentioned, the accuracy, you zoom this map in far enough and you've got accuracy down to within a couple of feet.
So why isn't a warrant needed for using this tracking information?
You mean other than the fact that because we live in a dystopian hellscape? Did you mean it in a different way? In reality, at this point, it seems to be settled law in the United States anyway that warrants aren't needed to access historical cell phone tracking data. Now, it's up to the interpreter, like the Department of Justice, what constitutes historical. Really, everything is historical except in this very moment. How far back, I don't know that they've defined historical versus real time, but there are the rulings from the DOJ back to at least 2016 that I could see that said, nope, you do not need a warrant to access cell phone data. And Congress has not acted to change that. And so the argument probably goes, you're tracking a device, and then there's this coy little dance, right? You don't actually know who the person is. This is strictly a device. It would be pretty easy for anyone who is using Locate X to figure out pretty quickly who that individual was. That's just a facade. But at any rate, the fact is, this is currently the law of the land, at least in the United States. And I think a lot of other countries, it's pretty similar.
So what are the ethical dilemmas that arise from using a tool like Locate X regarding healthcare and religion, watching people enter and exit places of worship?
Sure. Yeah. What this boils down to is, do we as a society believe in an individual's right to privacy, or don't we? The government seems to be increasingly saying that we don't. They don't always use quite those words, but it seems like we're getting closer and closer to hearing a flat out Supreme Court case or something that says, nope, you don't have a right to privacy. So the government can regulate things that previously would have been considered a person's private matters. Profiling becomes very easy with this kind of technology and use thereof. So yes, if a given government decides that it's got an interest in certain kinds of healthcare procedures or the comings and goings of members of a certain religion, a product like Locate X just serves that up to them on a plate. And you asked about what are the ethical dilemmas. To me, the news here and the scary thing is that for a lot of members of government and law enforcement and even citizens, they don't see this as much of a dilemma at all. That's the problem, right? And I guess I'm almost at the other extreme where I also don't see much of a dilemma. This shouldn't happen. And of course, the devil's advocate is always going to be, gee, if you could stop a terrorist attack with this data, you're saying you wouldn't? And there's always going to be that kind of argument. But
yeah, I think the devil's advocate is a little like a lot of the Fourth Amendment was written a little before the cell phone.
Yeah, right.
But a lot of what we inherit from like phone and phone data is inherited from telephone rules around you're giving your data to the phone company, you're giving your data to mobile ad brokers willingly. And to me, the devil's advocate is that, yeah, if you could stop a terrorist attack with the data, would you do it? But really, it's I think people should more broadly analyze what type of data they give and to whom. Now, you could argue that society makes it very difficult to fully abstract yourself from those things. But I think if we're saying like, hey, technology has gotten ahead of the law, then certainly the law has answers for that too.
Yeah, no, that's correct. But I'm trying to, in responding to the way Kali framed it as what's the ethical dilemma, that's what I'm coming down to. Like the societal question of the right to privacy versus the state's interest in promoting the kind of society that it wants to promote. That's the essence, I think, of the ethical dilemma here. And as I say, there's so much momentum toward surveillance, whether it's surveillance capitalism or surveillance law enforcement, that it doesn't feel like the dilemma is playing out sufficiently as a dilemma on the stage writ large. And that's what makes me crazy here.
Absolutely. So are there mitigations that people can consider with their smartphones, or is this pretty much we need to use a burner phone?
Actually, I want to address that because the sad thing here is using a burner phone doesn't really help.
What?
Because what's going on is that there's a device, and if you can map where that device comes and goes, you use a burner phone. So that burner phone is going to go from your house to your supermarket, to your friend's house, to your place of work, to your place of worship, to your place of health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't really matter that it's a burner phone at that point. However, all hope is not lost here because there are ways that you can reduce this amount of tracking. Every phone has something called a MAID, which stands for Mobile Advertising Identifier, right built into the operating system of your phone. If this doesn't tell you what these phones are really for, now Mobile Advertising Identifier is built into the OS of your phone, whether it's iOS, Android. And in Apple, you may have done this without knowing about the thing called the MAID, which actually Apple has some other acronym for it. But you can disable it on an app-by-app basis by preventing location tracking. And so that's a setting that a lot of folks who are listening or watching probably are familiar with. And you can set, they have degrees of either like never allow location tracking or only while I'm using this app or ask me every time or whatever. So it's a good thing to be aware of. And then in Android, it's a little bit deeper in the settings, but they seem to also, as I interpret it, have a more thorough approach to this, which is that you can entirely delete the MAID from an Android phone. And then if you decide that you do want those optimized customer experiences and you want ad targeting and blah, 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 then, well, you can regenerate it. But so yeah, you have the option to completely get rid of that thing in Android. So very much worth checking out. And then there are also services, of course, and these are, I think they're becoming a little bit more popular to have your data deleted. You can pay for a service that will go and try to delete your data, make it unavailable to data brokers, et cetera. I have not ever read anything that gave me a lot of confidence. That's a very complete process.
They just show up to your house and just start deleting things.
Yeah. So that caveat emptor, check those things out. The spirit behind them seems to be good, but I can't vouch for their actual effectiveness. But I do think that these settings in phones that allow you to disable some of this tracking are a good idea. And by the way, Kali, in the burner phone, you would have to know how to go and do that in the burner phone as well. So again, the way to really avoid this tracking, of course, is not to carry a phone with you, which has convenience implications for most of us in society these days.
Yeah, I bring up the burner phone because that's what every like drama show has taught me is
I
like,
know, right?
burner phone.
Yeah.
You need 1,000 burner phones.
Yeah, you need to stash
once.
them like in the bushes near places where you might need to go, and then pull them out, use them to make that call, and then leave them back in the bushes. It's like geocaching. It's actually, maybe that's what we should, but don't use your phone as the GPS for the geocaching. Buy a Garmin.
I have one.
Yeah.
They still make those?
I still like using it. Like sometimes the phone doesn't work, Taylor. So I got my backup on
That's a good
backups.
idea, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea, Tay.
Also, Apple doesn't make it easy for you to access the GPS function independent of having cell service or Wi-Fi. You can do it. I think you'd have to pay for apps, or if you use Google Maps, you can download the Google Map and have it available offline. But it's not just as simple as I'm going to put it in airplane mode and then I'm going to go click into the GPS and know where I am. You have to take some further steps.
Yeah, this has been an interesting story to say the least. Come to the end though. There's a lot more we could absolutely say on this topic, but we're limited on time. So we're going to go into what we call our hoodie ratings. And if you're a newer listener, first of all, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. When we talk about these news stories, we do like to give them a hoodie rating is what we call it at the end, where it's from 1 to 10 hoodie. And of course you can think of the stereotypical hacker in a hoodie.
But this week it's the Grim Reaper's hood.
Oh yes, because it's Halloween week, of course.
Correct.
So the Grim Reaper's hood. And so as you can imagine, 10 is absolutely like all the alarms. This is the worst thing that could ever happen. And then 1 is not so bad. You've cheated death, maybe. I don't know. But so yeah, 1 through 10 Grim Reaper's hoodies. And because Tim, you started by talking us through this article, we'll start with Taylor for his opinion.
Yeah, this one is an interesting one because I think that a lot of folks are not fully aware of where all of their kind of location metadata goes and what is available via the browser, what's available via a phone provider, your ISP. I think a lot of folks, there's definitely a delineation there. I guess the question is like, when do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy? And that's what the Fourth Amendment has always been going back and forth. Hey, if your garbage is like underneath the eaves of your house, you reasonably expect privacy. If you put it out for the garbage folks to get it, you've lost your reasonable expectation of privacy. And now anything that's in there is going to fit the law enforcement. So it's always this like, where's your reasonable expectation of privacy? And so again, where technology's gotten out way ahead, where anybody thought this was going or what was possible in this arena from tracking folks and building a surveillance state, I think it's certainly worth assessing. I think everyone is worth assessing. Where's my data going? I think we talk about this a lot, like doing the audits on enabling ads or enabling tracking or that kind of thing. This isn't super new news, but the front end and making it easier to get to for folks in a law enforcement capacity, I think is the news here. I'll give it 2.25 Grim Reaper hoodies from like hey, everyone should be aware of what is possible in this arena. And then if you think, hey, my reasonable expectation of privacy is everything I do on my phone, then you got to talk to your legislators about it, because ultimately it's got to come from legislation to more strictly codify what, where we expect to have privacy in our lives.
Legislation or conceivably market forces. If enough people become aware of this and say, I'm not going to buy your phone if you don't give me a way to turn off this kind of tracking. But in reality, you've got basically two phone OSs. So if one of them makes this a selling point, the other one may well follow suit.
Yeah. If we see an Apple privacy event, special privacy event,
yeah,
we'll know we've won.
Thanks, Tay. Tim, what are you thinking? Do you feel similarly?
I'm more freaked out than Tay about this because I think it's the trend I see toward the amount of surveillance and the overall sort of apathy toward doing much of anything about it in the larger society. We in InfoSec tend to be very privacy conscious compared to the average bear. But outside of the InfoSec community, there is not that much awareness of it. And there is a substantial part of the population that says, yeah, I'm okay with law enforcement enforcing people doing things that I don't agree with. So I'm more worried about this. To me, this is like 7 Grim Reaper hoodies.
Oh, that's pretty. I don't remember the last time you two were like so different on your Grim Reaper hoodies.
It happens once in a while.
Yeah.
I see this as a threat, right? What can we do about it perspective, I guess. I'm more on the apathetic side of the aisle, but I do think, again, pushing on legislation, pushing on, we're all getting ready to vote, right? So here, I'll plug, go vote and read about the judges in the court cases. If you have any judgeships that are up for election, because that is where this stuff happens, right? If you're talking about how do we define what the reasonable expectation of privacy is, it's going to start in a court case and it's going to go up to the Supreme Court and then market forces on the other side. Hey, don't buy a phone with this stuff. But yeah.
The only thing about that is you should vote, but this is coming out the day after election day. So I hope
you should have voted, I guess. And if you didn't,
you should always vote.
It's just always a reminder to vote. But yeah, that very interesting stuff, to say the least. So thank you so much, Tim, for walking us through that. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about APT29. Stay tuned. Hey, Breaking Badness listeners. We've noticed an uptick in listeners hailing from Germany, and we wanted to give a shout out to B-Sides Munich. Workshops will be held on November 9th, and the speaker schedule begins on November 11th. We're looking forward to talks such as demystifying the first few minutes after compromising a container, presented by Stuart McMurray, how to make things a bit more secure than yesterday, every day, presented by Lacey Hawk, and Becoming the Evil Maid, Hacking Android Disk Encryption for Fun and Profit, presented by David Giester. So if you're in the Munich, Germany area between November 9th and November 11th, we hope you'll be able to attend. And thank you to all of our new listeners in Germany. And now, back to Breaking Badness. And we're back. How was the break? Refreshing?
Refreshing.
Good. good. That's what I want. We could all use a break sometimes, but we got to jump back into it. So our second story that we're covering today is when a blizzard becomes flurries, where Amazon identified internet domains abused by APT29, aka Midnight Blizzard. So Tay, the threat actor associated with this, as I just mentioned, is Midnight Blizzard, which is not yet a treat on the Dairy Queen menu. So knowing that, what else do we know about this group?
Yeah, this group has been around for quite some time, following Microsoft's kind of rebrand of their threat landscape so this was formerly known as, under the Microsoft banner, Nobelium, when they were doing their kind of elemental naming of folks. It's also known as Cozy Bear, Fancy Bear, the Dukes, APT29, thought to be aligned with the SVR in Russia, and tentatively aligned to FSB in Russia, aligned to Russian state interests and all the things that they would want to happen. This is the most recent flurry of this activity that has popped out, and now under the new, more modern naming conventions from Microsoft, where things from Russia are blizzards. It's a blizzard. But it has nothing to do with Dairy Queen, unfortunately.
Bummer. I don't like that. Is the activity discovered by Amazon different from tactics this group previously used?
This group's been around so long enough, they've used a lot of different types of tactics, but they are very well known for pretexting in their phishing campaigns and targeting folks in organizations that are aligned with industry and government military stuff. So this was like Ukraine, targeting in Ukraine, but it was using phishing lures that were impersonating AWS services and regions, while also impersonating some of the potential victims of folks that are trying to get their passwords out of, that type of thing.
Do you think Amazon was the intended target?
In this case, no. It looks like Amazon, since they were impersonated a lot of these. So if you look at this, the AWS security folks posted this list of domains that were discovered by the computer emergency response team in Ukraine, saying, hey, we've got early warning that a bunch of these domains that are imitating AWS. So it's like S3 dash insert target name here, right? So imitating the simple storage service from AWS. And then they also, at the FQDN, or fully qualified domain, at the subdomain level on these domains, there's lots of US1-East, US2-East. So some of the region names that are specifically used by AWS were imitated in the phishing links to gain that authenticity, get that trust. Because, hey, I've heard of US2 East, S3. Yeah, I use S3 all the time. I'm going to click that.
You would have to have a photographic memory to know exactly what those URLs look like and tell them apart from false ones.
Oh, yeah. So doing some of the research for talking to y'all here, we jumped into our own tooling, and you go poking around our own DNS DB using the Scout interface by Farsight. We don't do product plugs here very often, and you can see, hey, here's Midnight Blizzard or whoever, right? Here's their little campaign. And then you can see all these other resource records that look exactly like that are genuine, that are underpinning the internet in important ways.
So you'd mentioned how we can see this infrastructure in our tooling, and we don't know exactly how AWS made this discovery, do we? Or do you have some ideas on how it was done?
It's very possible that they're looking for registration and namespace reservation of this type. It's like they're impersonated pretty heavily. It's like a lot of AWS dash whatever .cloud. So it would not surprise me if they had some visibility onto the registration activity of these actors. Again, if you're looking across just even our data set, this stuff would stick out a little bit because it's AWS naming conventions on infrastructure that is not AWS whatsoever that is being used by the adversary here.
So what was the computer emergency response team of Ukraine's response to this cert?
They identified this activity and then published info on it. So you've got a pretty broad scale phishing attempt and maybe success in some cases, I'm sure, where they're flooding folks with, it's an interesting kind of chain of events, but it's an RDP file. So a remote desktop protocol file that then opens up a remote desktop to attacker infrastructure that then, and here are our friends, they're really putting the zero trust in zero trust because they're using zero trust URLs. And hey, you got to help set up your zero trust IAM and AWS. And you're like, okay, sure. And then you get they're hunting for those Microsoft credentials. So when the RDP session opens up, it's like, hey, let me go pop my Microsoft credentials in. And then, oh no,
And what do you think defenders can take away from this?
They can block RDP files at the mail gateway. Which it's funny because this is not a super new tactic. So there are folks that originally published some activity around this 10 years ago. Like the kind of first, hey, you could use an RDP file to really trick somebody. But yeah, the biggest kind of advice from if you're sitting on a mail gateway and you can block those RDP files is that you folks probably don't need RDP files.
All right, thanks, Tay. Well, we've reached the hoodie portion of this article as well. So since we just heard from you, we'll start with Tim.
So I think really there's two ways to look at the hoodie rating for this. One is specific to Midnight Blizzard, aka Apartment 29. I think we should just be dorks and always call it Apartment 29. So Apartment 29 is not targeting most of our viewers, most InfoSec defenders out there in the SOC. However, the threat of URLs that imitate Amazon infrastructure absolutely is, you could talk about a lure that you could be fooled by, as far as when you're looking at domains that are imitating, I don't know, just Microsoft or Amazon itself, like Amazon.com or other well-known brands, etc. We in this industry, I think, have a fairly well-trained eye, and we can see those illicit URLs and avoid clicking on obvious phishing domains. With these ones that are imitating the Amazon infrastructure URLs, again, that's a lot harder to spot at a glance. And so it feels like a form of phishing that could be a little bit more dangerous than average. So I'm going to put my hoodie ratings based on that technique more than just this particular apartment group itself, Midnight Blizzard. And so I'm going to put me down for 3.5 hoodies here.
Excellent. Gotcha. Taylor, do you feel similarly or not?
Yeah, I think I'm probably in the ballpark club with Tim. I'll go 3.455 repeating so I can round up. And
nice. The 5 isn't usually a repeating digit. I like that.
Yeah, we got to repeat it.
Yep, that's good.
I think the interesting thing about this is, as we've also said, we're a few weeks away here from an election. This is a group that has been known to dabble in those. And so it's not super surprising to see increased activity like this. The scale of it is, this is noisier than it normally is, I'll say, and broader. So that's interesting. So yeah, I'll go 3.455 Death's Cowl hoodie repeatings.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you, both of you, for your thoughts on this. We've reached the end, but before we exit, we do like to do gold guidance and grievances. So again, if you are a newer listener, we like to share our thoughts. And as you can probably guess from the name, we like to share something good that we think would be beneficial to hear, something that's instructional, or just any training or tips that we found helpful. And then, of course, anything that's bothering us. So we called it gold guidance and grievances, but we do like to start with grievances and work our way back to the gold, because it's difficult to end an episode on a low note. So Tay, since we just heard from you, let's hear from Tim on his gold guidance and grievances, not in that order.
Yeah, all right. I'm cheating this week because they are so tied into the story that I did, but I can't help it. These are the things that burned my bacon, ground my gears, / made me happy over the last few days in thinking about the internet and society, etc. The grievance is the state of surveillance capitalism. And I think I'm just as bothered by the government surveillance as the capitalism part of it, but I'm going to pick on the capitalism piece here, because it wouldn't be as easy for the government to do this if there weren't so many for-profit entities, data brokers, and so forth, making it easy to get the information that makes privacy almost impossible these days. My grievances against the overall state of surveillance capitalism. And check out pretty much anything by Cory Doctorow, by the way, if you want to get really good, insightful writing about all of this. And the embleepification of the internet, which is a term that I'm happy to see is being more and more broadly used by people. So I'm glad to see the influence of Cory's writing spreading. My guidance is disable all of the tracking that you possibly can in everything. it's worth spending time on this. It's take an hour, take a couple of hours, and just do it. You'll be doing yourself a favor. And so far, I've never heard anybody say, gosh, what's missing from my life is more targeted ads.
I miss those targeted ads.
Yeah, nobody ever says that. Said no one
I
ever.
felt like they
So
really got me.
it is fun sometimes to throw some chaff and do some searches on completely ridiculous things that you would never search on just to see the stupid ads for them show up. But that doesn't happen to me that much these days because I have taken some time to turn off a lot of that tracking. So there's my guidance. And my gold is, again, 404 Media. They are so good. And we need good, incisive journalism that asks the harder questions and tackles them head on. And I love what they're doing over there at 404. So give them a subscribe and at minimum, check them out, read them, but certainly a fan of supporting them financially. So there we have it.
Excellent. Tay, what about you?
Let's see. Gold.
Nope, start at the end with the
I
green.
don't have any particular grievances to air. I don't know. Tim, surveillance capitalism is absolutely a thing. Consider how much you're feeding that beast. If your ads are too targeted, you're doing it wrong. Like, one thing I saw a really neat thing come out of it. This is very random, but it's Exeter B-Sides over in the UK. But Ross Bevington, who is over at Microsoft and focuses on deception, gave a really interesting talk. So I'll plug that talk, but just talking about Microsoft's efforts to knock back phishing, their efforts to introduce deception into the phishing ecosystem to where they're finding phishing sites and flooding them with fake credentials and all kinds of great stuff. So yeah, I'll give that a plug.
Awesome. All right. I think we've reached the end, gentlemen. This has been a great episode. Like, I really appreciate you guys hanging out and talking about your perspectives on these two stories and sharing your knowledge with our audience. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you to our listeners. You are the reason we keep coming back week after week and keep on doing this. So again, like, hope that you come back again next week because we're going to have another all new episode of Breaking Badness. And if you have any suggestions or anything you want to share with us,
You want to be on the show?
if you want to be on the show, we're findable. Yeah, come on, join us. We're on X and Mastodon and LinkedIn. Absolutely, come on, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today. So thanks everybody for being here, and we'll catch you next week for another all new episode of Breaking Badness.
Bye-bye, y'all.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.